mythology, and today we're going to talk about the werewolf. Um, Especially the werewolf lore has been around for years, been passed down from generation to generation, and in folklore, a werewolf from Old English means man wolf, or occasionally lycanthrope from ancient Greek mythology, which means wolf human, or basically the werewolf is an individual who can shapeshift into a wolf, or especially in modern film, a hybrid wolf human like creature, either purposely or after being placed under a curse or affliction. Um, Often a bite or the occasional scratch from another werewolf, with the transformations occurring on the nights of a full moon. Basically, remember the old saying, if there's a full moon, watch out for werewolves. Basically, that was an old saying years ago. Um, Now, early sources for this belief and disability or affliction, called lycanthropy, um, or lycanthropy, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Petronius, who lived between the years of 27 to 66, and Gervase of Tilbury, who lived from the year 1150 to 1228. Now, if you're going to be tuning in, make sure to hit this like and subscribe button for the channel Rusty the King. If you want more videos like this, and leave a comment. Let me know what you guys are thinking on these videos, and if you want more like this. And we're gonna keep going. The werewolf is a widespread concept in in European folklore, and existing in many variants, which are related by a common development of a Christian interpretation of underlying European folklore that was developed during the medieval period. Um, Now, also, with the werewolves, their group in this mythology, similar entity is a skinwalker. Um, and then the folklore is worldwide. Basically, it's passed out throughout the whole United States and throughout Europe and everything else like that. Other names is lycanthrope. Um, Now, from the early modern period, werewolf beliefs developed in parallel to the beliefs in witches um, during the Middle Ages and the early modern period. Like with the witchcraft trials as a whole, the trial of supposed werewolves emerged in what is now Switzerland. Especially the Belaise and Veld in the early 15th century and spread throughout Europe in the 16th century, and peaking in the 17th and subsiding by the 18th century. Now, the persecution of werewolves and the associated folklore is an integral part of the witch hunt phenomenon, albeit a marginal one. Now, accusations of lycanthropy being involved in only a small fraction of witchcraft trials. Now, during the early period, accusations of lycanthropy, which means transformation into a werewolf, were mixed with accusations of wolf riding or wolf charming. Now, the case of Peter Stump from 1589 um, led to a significant peak in both interest in and persecution of supposed werewolves. Um, Primarily in French-speaking and German-speaking Europe, the phenomenon persisted longest in Bavaria and Austria. Um, with persecution of wolf charmers recorded until well after 1650, the final cases taking place in the early 18th century in Carinthia and Styria. Um, Now, after the end of the witch trials, the werewolf became of interest in folklore studies and in the emerging Gothic horror genre. Especially, yes, I have. I'm finishing up my first class in a couple weeks before I start my second one. Um, yeah, MJ's asking about my plant engineering classes. I'm stud I It is. Um, I'm maintaining a C average in my class. As long as I maintain a C average, my job pays for it. Um, Now, after the end of the trials, the werewolf became an interest in folklore studies and in the emerging Gothic horror genre. Especially my favorite werewolf movie is actually centered on werewolves and vampires, and it's Underworld. Underworld's a really good movie about vampires and werewolves. Um, And werewolf fiction as a genre has pre-modern precedents in medieval romances like e.g. Bis Claveret and something called Guillerme Palerme, and developed in the 18th century out of the semi-fictional chapbook tradition. Now, the trappings of horror literature in the 20th century became part of the horror and the fantasy genre of modern popular culture. Now, the modern English werewolf descends from the Old English werewolf, which is cognate of Middle Dutch werewolf, Middle Low German werewolf, or werewolf, Middle High German with the word werewolf, and West Frisian I usually don't tell anybody where I'm from, but I can tell you it's just the United States. I don't tell anybody what town I'm in. Um, um, now these terms are usually derived from Proto-Germanic Germanic form reconstructed as man-wolf itself from an earlier pre-Germanic form. Now, another word that's an alternative reconstruction is wolf-clothed, and it would bring the Germanic compound closer to the Slavic meaning, with other semantic parallels in Old Norse mythology, meaning like words like wolf-skinned, wolf-coat, Old Irish meaning wolf-skinner, and Sanskrit. Now, here's a picture of a werewolf perched on top of in the woods. Let's see if we can get that there. So you can see the werewolf sitting there, but there's going to be more stuff you're going to see too once we get down here. Now, the Norse branch underwent taboo modifications, but the Old Norse Bargolfer only attested as a translation of Old French Garwolf from Marie's lay of Bisclaveret. Now, replacing the word man with Varger, meaning wolf outlaw. Now, perhaps under the influence of the Old French expression Laus Warus, not sure if I'm saying that right either. Modern Lopgaru, which literally means wolf and werewolf. The modern Norse from Barolov Danish in the region and Swedish was either borrowed from the Middle Low German werewolf, or else it was derived from an unattested Old Norse Norse word Werwolfer, which is posited as the regular descendant of Proto-Germanic Wyra wolf was. An Old Frankish form, werewolf, is inferred from the Middle Low German variant, and it was most likely borrowed into the Old Norman with regular Germanic Romance correspondence. Now, the Proto-Slavic noun, meaning wolf-haired, animal fur, or animal hair or fur, can be reconstructed from the Serbian Bukodlak. Not for sure if I'm saying that right either. Slovenian meaning Bukodlak, and Czechoslovakian Bukodlak. Now, although formal variations in Slavic languages in the latest attestation of some forms pose difficulties in tracing the origin of the term. Now, the Greek and the Romanian terms designating vampire-like creatures in Balkan folklores were borrowed from Slavic languages. Now, that will be a video I'll be doing next week. I'll be doing the video on the vampire. Now, the same form is found in other non-Slavic languages of the region, such as Albanian and Turkish. Now, the Bulgarian and the Church Slavonic may be interpreted as back borrowings from Greek. Now, the name Brodawak first appeared in the Russian poet Alexander Pushkin's work Pesny, which was published back in 1835. Now, the source of Pushkin's distinctive form remains debated in scholarship. A Proto-Celtic noun meaning man-dog has been reconstructed from the Celtiberian, the Old Britannic place name Byroconium, meaning place of man-dogs or werewolves. The Old Irish noun virtue, meaning male dog or fierce dog, and the medieval personal names in Old Welsh and Old Breton. Wolves were now the werewolves were metaphorically designated as dogs in Celtic culture. Now the modern term lycanthropy comes from ancient Greek, and itself means from lycanthropos, meaning wolf man. Ancient writers used the term solely in the context of clinical lycanthropy, a condition in which the patient imagined himself to be a wolf or a werewolf. Modern writers later used lycanthrope as a synonym of werewolf, referring to a person who, according to medieval superstition, could assume the form of a wolf. Now here is a man wearing wolf skin, and it's an Attic red figure base painting from 460. Now with the European motif of the devilish werewolf devouring human flesh, and it harks back to a common development during the Middle Ages in the context of Christianity. Now, although stories of humans turning into wolves take their roots in earlier pre-Christian belief, the underlying common origin can be traced back to Proto-Indo-European mythology, where lycanthropy is reconstructed as an aspect of the initiation of the warrior class, which may have included a cult focused on dogs and wolves, and it was identified with an age grade of young unmarried warriors. The standard comparative overview of this aspect of Indo-European mythology is McCone, back from 1987. Now, a few references to men changing into wolves are found in ancient Greek literature and folklore. Herodotus, in his histories, had wrote that according to what the Scythians and the Greeks settled in Scythia told him, the Nuri, which was a tribe to the northeast of Scythia, were all transformed into wolves once every year for several days and then changed back to the human shape. Now he added that he was not convinced by the story, but the locals swore to its truth. The tale was also mentioned by Pomponius Mela. Now, in the 2nd century BC, the Greek geographer Pausanias had related the story of King Lycaon of Arcadia, who was transformed into a wolf because he had sacrificed a child at the altar of Zeus. And here's a picture, supposedly, of Zeus transforming the king into a werewolf. And this was an engraving by Hendrik Goldzius. Now this story, in the version of the legend told by Ovid and the Metamorphosis, when Zeus visits the king Lycaon, disguised as a common man, Lycaon wants to test if he is really a god, and to this end, he kills a Molossian hostage and serves up his entrails to Zeus. Now disgusted, the god turns Lycaon into a werewolf. Now, however, in other accounts of this legend, like that of Apollodorus Bibliotheca, Zeus blasts him and his sons with thunderbolts as a punishment. Now, The Pausanians also relates the story of an Arcadian man called Demarchus of Parrhasia, who was turned into a wolf after tasting the entrails of a human child sacrificed to Zeus. Um, he was eventually restored to human form 10 years later, and he went on to become an Olympic champion. Now, in this tale, is also recounted by Pliny the Elder, who calls the man um, Damaeantius, quoted Agrippios. Now, according to the Pausanians, this was not a one-off event, but that men have been transformed into wolves during the sacrifices to Zeus since the time of Lycaon. Now, if they abstain from tasting human flesh while being werewolves, they would be restored to human form 9 years later. But if they do not abstain, they would remain wolves until the day they die. Now, Lycos of Athens was a wolf-shaped hero whose shrine stood by the jury court, and the first jurors were named after him. Now, Pliny the Elder, likewise, recounts another tale of lycanthropy, quoting somebody. He mentions that in Arcadia, once a year, a man was chosen by a lot from the Anthos clan. Now, the chosen man was escorted into a marsh in the area, where he hung his clothes into an oak tree, swam across the marsh, and transformed into a wolf, joining the pack for 9 years. Now, during these 9 years, if he refrained from tasting human flesh, he would return to the same marsh, swim back, and recover his previous human form, with 9 years added to his appearance. Ovid also relates stories of men who roamed the woods of Arcadia in the form of wolves. Now, Virgil, in his poetic work Eclogues, wrote about a man called Morris, who used herbs and poisons picked in his native Pontus and to turn himself into a wolf. Now, in prose, the Satyricon, which was a written circa AD, back from 60, by the Gaius Petronius Arbiter, one of the characters, Niceros, tells a story at a banquet about a friend who turned into a wolf. He describes the incident as follows: "When I took for my buddy, I see he stripped and piled his clothes by the roadside. He pees in a circle around his clothes, and then just like that, he turns into a werewolf. Now after that he turned into after he turned into a wolf, he started howling and then ran off into the woods." The early Christian authors also mention werewolves in the City of God. Augustine of Hippo gives an account similar to that found by Pliny the Elder. Augustine explains that it is very generally believed that by certain witches' spells, men can be turned into werewolves. Now, physical metamorphosis was also mentioned in the Capitulum, attributed to the Council of Ancira in the 4th century. Now, it became the church's doctrinal text in relation to magic wolves and transformation, such as those of werewolves. The Capitulum Episcopi states that whoever believes that anything can be transformed into another species or likeness except by God himself is beyond doubt an infidel. Now, in these works of Roman writers, werewolves often received the name turnskin. Now, Augustine instead uses the phrase in lupum, and it changed into the form of a wolf to describe the physical metamorphosis of werewolves, which is similar to phrases used in the medieval period. Now, before we go any further, let me know if you guys believe that werewolves, witches, ghosts, or aliens can exist can exist or coexist with us, or if you have a belief in these. Now, there is evidence of widespread belief in werewolves in medieval Europe. Now, this evidence spans much of the continent, as well as the British Isles. Now, the werewolves were mentioned in the medieval law codes, such as that of King Newt, Arsenut, or his name is spelled Cnut. and he's not a person that I'm even familiar with. Um, he wrote whose ecclesiastical ordinances inform us that the codes aim to ensure that the madly audacious werewolf do not do to widely devastate nor bite to many of the spiritual flock. Um, Liutprand of Cremonia reports a rumor that Bahan, who was the son of Simeon I of Bulgaria, and here's a statue carved of him. This is Simeon I of Bulgaria. That's a statue that was carved of him, which is kind of cool if you think about that. Could use magic to turn himself into a werewolf. Now, the works of Augustine of Hippo had a large influence on the development of Western Christianity, and they were widely read by churchmen of the medieval period. Now, these churchmen occasionally discuss werewolves in their work. Famous examples include Gerald of Wales's Werewolves of Ossory, found in his Topographia Hibernica, and in Gervase of Tilbury's Odia Imperiola. Both were written, which were both written for royal audiences if you were royal back then. Now, Gervase of Tilbury reveals to the reader that belief in such transformations. He also mentions women turning into cats and into snakes, and this was widespread stories spread across Europe. Gervase also uses the phrase "Q ato dino scunter" when discussing these metamorphoses, which translate to it is known. Now, Gervase, who was writing in Germany at the time, tells the reader that the transformation of men into werewolves cannot be easily dismissed, for in England we have often seen men change into wolves. Now, further evidence of the widespread belief in werewolves and other human-animal transformation can be seen in theological attacks made against such beliefs by Conrad of Hersau, which was writing in the 11th century, forbids the reading of stories in which a person's reason is obscured following such a transformation. Conrad specifically refers to the tales of Ovid in his tract. Now, Pseudo-Augustine, writing in the 12th century, follows Augustine of Hippo's argument that no physical transformation can be made by any but God, stating that the body corporally cannot be changed into the material limbs of any animal. Marie de France's poem, Bisclaveret, which was written around 1200, is another example in which the eponymous nobleman Bisclaveret, for reasons not described, had to transform into a wolf every week. Now, when his treacherous wife stole his clothing, needed to restore his human form, he escaped the king's wolf hunt by imploring the king for mercy, and he accompanied the king thereafter. His behavior at court was gentle until his wife and her new husband appeared at court so much so that his hateful attack on the couple was deemed justly motivated, and the truth was revealed. Now, this lie, a type of Breton sung poem, follows many themes found within other werewolf tales. Now, the removal of clothing and attempting to refrain from the consumption of human flesh can be found in Pliny the Elder, as well as in the second of Gervase of Tilbury's werewolf stories. Which is about a werewolf by the name of Chabaret. Now, Murray also reveals to us the existence of werewolf believed in Breton and Norman France by telling us the Franco-Norman word for werewolf, or gerwolf, which she explains are common in that part of France, whereas many men turned into werewolves. Now, Gervase supports this terminology when he tells us that the French used the term Gerwerfly to describe what the English call werewolves. Leon and Baclarai are two anonymous lays that share the theme of a werewolf knight being betrayed by his wife. Um, um, now, now the German word werewolf was described by Burchard von Worms in the 11th century and Berthold of Regensburg in the 13th century, but it's not recorded um, in all of medieval German poetry or fiction. Now, while Baring Gold, now, 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 while Baring Gold argues that references to werewolves were rare in England, presumably because whatever significance the wolfmen of Germanic paganism had carried, the associated beliefs and practices had been successfully repressed after Christianization, or if they persisted at all, they did so outside of the sphere of literacy available to us. Um, Now, there are many sources other than those mentioned above. Such examples of werewolves in Ireland and the British Isles can be found in the work of the 9th century Welsh monk Nennius. Now, female werewolves appear in the Irish work tales of the elders from the 12th century, and Welsh werewolves in the 12th to 13th century work Mabinogion. Oh, shit, hold on. Here is a Vendel period depiction of a warrior wearing wolf skin. And you can see that there. I just love this old stuff. This stuff fascinates me for years. Now, in the Germanic pagan tradition associated with wolfmen persisted longest in the Scandinavian Viking Age. Vikings are another thing that interests me, and I might want to do something on Vikings too. Harald I of Norway is known to have had a body of Ulfhednir, which means wolf-coated men. Which are mentioned in the Dolia and the Volsgana saga and resemble some werewolf legends. Now, the Ulfhednir were fighters similar to the Berserkers, though they were dressed in wolf hides rather than those of bears and were reputed to channel the spirits of these animals to enhance effectiveness in battle. Much like wild animals, Ulfhednir and Berserkers are closely associated with the Norse god Odin. Odin is very popular in Norse mythology, so is Thor. And Thor is supposed to be the son, I think, of Odin. The Scandinavian traditions of this period may have spread to Kievan Rus, giving rise to the Slavic werewolf tales. Now, the 11th century Belarusian Prince Mstislav of Polotsk was considered to have been a werewolf capable of moving at superhuman speed, as recounted in the tale of Igor's campaign. Now, this situation, as described during the medieval period, gives rise to the dual form of werewolf folklore in early modern Europe. On the one hand, the Germanic werewolf, which becomes associated with the witchcraft panic, and on the other hand, the Slavic werewolf, or Mokolok, becomes associated with the concept of the revenant or vampire. The Eastern werewolf vampire is found in the folklore of Central and Eastern Europe, including Hungary, Romania, and the Balkans, and while the Western werewolf sorcerer is found in France, the German-speaking Europe, and in the Baltics. Now, being a werewolf was a common accusation in witch trials. It is featured in the Belaise witch trials, one of the earliest such trials in the first half of the 15th century, and this was way before the Salem witch trials happened. Now, in 1539, Martin Luther used the form Beowulf to describe a hypothetical ruler worse than a tyrant who must be resisted. And here's an actual wood carving of a werewolf attack by Lucas back in from 1512. Um, some of these names are highlighted, and you can also, and I could also do videos on these. I would just have to write down the people's names so that I can do videos on them in the next several weeks or so. Now, I also got a package coming in today, so I'm waiting on that from Amazon. So, in Historia de Gentibus Septentrionabilis from 1555, Olaus Magnus describes in book 18, chapter 45, an annual assembly of werewolves near the Lithuania Courland border. Now the participants, including Lithuanian nobility and werewolves from the surrounding areas, gather to test their strength by attempting to jump over a castle wall's ruins. Now those who succeed are regarded as strong, while weaker participants are punished by being whipped. In early modern history, there have been numerous reports of werewolf attacks and consequent court trials in 16th century France. Now in some of these cases, there had been clear evidence against the accused of murder and cannibalism, but no association with werewolves. In other cases, people have been terrified by such creatures, such as that of Gillis, Garnier, and Dole in 1573, who was convicted of being a werewolf. Okay, now in a peak of attention to lycanthropy came in the 16th century to early 17th century. Now, as part of the European witch trials, a number of treaties on werewolves were written in France during 1595 and 1615. Now, in 1598, werewolves were cited in Anjou. In 1602, Henry Bogoet wrote a lengthy chapter about werewolves. In 1603, a teenage werewolf was sentenced to life imprisonment in Bordeaux. And here is an actual, this is a colored pen drawing. In Geneva, a man killed 16 children when he changed himself into a wolf. He was executed on October 15th of 1580. And this was a colored pen drawing by Johann Jacob Wick. Now, in the Swiss Wald region, werewolves were convicted in 1602 and in 1624. A treaty by a bald pastor in 1653, however, argued that lycanthropy was purely an illusion that was made up in people's minds. After this, the only further record from the Bell dates to 1670. A boy claimed he and his mother could change themselves into werewolves, which was not taken seriously by anybody in town. At the beginning of the 17th century, witchcraft was prosecuted by James I of England, who regarded that werewolves as victims of delusion induced by a natural superabundance of melancholic. Now, after 1650, belief in lycanthropy had mostly disappeared from French-speaking Europe, as evidenced in Diderot's encyclopedia, which attributed reports of lycanthropy to a disorder of the brain. Now, so after 1650, like I was saying, belief in lycanthropy had mostly disappeared from French-speaking Europe, as evidenced in Diderot's encyclopedia. Although there were continuing reports of extraordinary wolf-like beasts, they were not considered to be werewolves. But one such report concerned the beast of Gabaudian, which terrorized the general area of the former province of Gabaudian, now called Lazare, in south-central France from 1764 to 1767. It killed upwards of 80 men, women, and children. Now, the part of Europe which showed more vigorous interest in werewolves after 1650 was the Holy Roman Empire. At least nine works on lycanthropy were printed in Germany between 1649 and 1679. In the Austrian and Bavarian Alps, belief in werewolves persisted well into the 18th century, as late as in 1853 in Galicia, which was northwestern Spain. Manuel Blanco Romanista was judged and condemned as the author of a number of murders, but he claimed to be he maintained his innocence because of his condition of Loboschaum werewolf. And until the 20th century, wolf attacks on human were an occasional but still widespread feature of life in Europe. Some scholars have suggested that it was inevitable that wolves, being the most feared predators in Europe, were projected into the folklore of evil shapeshifters. Now, this is said to be corroborated by the fact that areas devoid of wolves typically use different kinds of predator to fill the niche. Were hyenas in Africa, were tigers in India, as well as were pumas and were jaguars in the southern South America. An idea is explored in Sabine Baring-Gould's work, The Book of Werewolves, is that werewolf legends may have been used to explain serial killings. Perhaps the most infamous examples is the case of Peter Stump, who was executed in 1589. The German farmer who was accused of being an alleged serial killer and cannibal, also known as the Werewolf of Bedburg. In Asian culture, common Turkic folklore holds a different light to the werewolf legends and that of Turkic Central Asian shamans after performing long and arduous rites, and it would voluntarily be able to transform it into the humanoid Kurtodam, literally meaning wolfman. Since the wolf was the totemic ancestor animal of the Turkic people, they would be respectful of any shaman who was in such a form. Now, when it comes to any medical condition of lycanthropy, some modern researchers have tried to explain the reports of werewolf behavior with recognized medical condition. In 1963, Dr. Lee Lillis of Guy's Hospital in London had wrote a paper entitled "On Porphyria" in the etiology of werewolves, in which he argues that historical accounts on werewolves could have been referring to victims of congenital porphyria, stating how the symptoms of photosensitivity, reddish teeth, and psychosis could have been grounds for accusing a person of being a werewolf. Now, this is argued against by Woodward, who points out how mythical werewolves were almost invariably portrayed as resembling true werewolves, and that their human forms were really physical and conspicuous as porphyria victims. Others have pointed out the possibility of historical werewolves having been people with hypertrichosis, a hereditary condition manifesting itself in excessive hair growth. Woodward dismissed the possibility as the rarity of the disease ruled it out from happening on a large scale, as werewolf cases were in medieval Europe. Now, Woodward suggested rabies as the origin of werewolf beliefs, claiming remarkable similarities between the symptoms of that disease and some of the legends. Now, Woodward focused on the idea that being bitten by a werewolf could result in the victim turning into one, which suggested the idea of a transmittable disease like rabies. Now, however, the idea that lycanthropy could be transmitted in this way is not a part of the original myths and legends, and only appears in relatively recent belief. Lycanthropy can also be met with the main content of a delusion. For example, the case of a woman has been reported who, during episodes of acute psychosis, complains of becoming 4 different species of animals. Now, in folklore belief, the beliefs are classified together under lycanthropy, are far from uniform, um, and the term is somewhat capriciously applied. Now, the transformation may be temporary or permanent. The were animal may be the man himself, metamorphosis may be his double, whose activity leaves the real man to all appearance unchanged, and that may be his soul, which goes forth seeking whomever it may devour, leaving its body in the state of trance, or maybe no more than the messenger of the human being. A real animal, a familiar spirit whose intimate connection with its owner is shown by the fact that any injury to it is believed by a phenomenon known as a repercussion to cause a corresponding injury to the human being. Now, werewolves were said in European folklore to bear telltale physical traits even in their human form. Now, these include the meeting of both eyebrows at the bridge of the nose, curved fingernails, low set ears, and a swinging stride. One method of identifying a werewolf in its human form was to cut the flesh of the accused under the pretense that fur would be seen with the wind. A Russian superstition recalls a werewolf can be recognized by bristles under the tongue. Now, the appearance of a werewolf in its animal form varies from culture to culture. It's most commonly portrayed as being indistinguishable from ordinary wolves, except for the fact that it has no tail. A trait throughout characteristics of werewolves and of witches in animal form is often larger, and retains human eyes and a voice. According to some Swedish accounts, the werewolf could be distinguished from a regular wolf by the fact that it would run on three legs, stretching the fourth one backwards to look like a tail. After returning to their human forms, werewolves are usually documented as becoming weak, debilitated, and undergoing painful nervous depression. And one universally rebelled trait in medieval Europe was the werewolf's habit of devouring recently buried corpse, a trait that is documented extensively, particularly in the medical psychologies in the 19th century. Now, when it comes to becoming a werewolf, various methods for becoming a werewolf have been reported. One of the simplest being the removal of clothing and putting on a belt of wolfskin, probably as a substitute for the assumption of an entire animal skin, which is also frequently described. In other cases, the body is rubbed with magic salve. Excuse me. Now, if you were going to believe that you could transform into any animal, now tell me, what animal would you want to be, and what animal do you think you could transform into? Now, in the 16th century, Swedish writer Olaus Magnus says that the Livonian werewolves were initiated by draining a cup of specifically prepared beer and repeating a set formula. Ralston in his Songs of the Russian People gives the form of incantation still familiar in Russia. In Italy, France, and Germany, it was said that a man or a woman could turn into a werewolf if he or she, on a certain Wednesday or Friday, slept outside on a summer night, with the moon being full and shining directly on his or her face. In other cases, the transformation was supposedly accomplished by a satanic allegiance for the most loathsome ends, often for the sake of sating a craving for human flesh. Now, the werewolves, writes Richard Bertelsmann, in 1628, are certain sorcerers who haven't anointed their bodies with an ointment which they make by the instinct of the devil and put it on a certain unenchanted girdle. It does not only unto the view of others seems as wolves, but to their own thinking, having both the shape and the nature of wolves, so long as they wear that said girdle, and they do depose themselves as the very wolves in rearing and killing and most of humane creatures. Now, the phenomenon of repercussion and the power of animal metamorphosis, or of sending out a familiar, real or spiritual as a messenger, and the supernormal powers that are conferred by association with such a familiar are also attributed to the magician, male and female, all the world over, and which superstitions are closely parallel to, if not identical with, lycanthrope beliefs. Now, the occasional involuntary character of lycanthropy being almost the sole distinguishing feature, in another direction, the phenomenon of repercussion is asserted to manifest itself in connection with the bush soul of the West African and the Nagul of Central America. Um, um, but there is no line of demarcation to be drawn on logical ground. Now, the assumed power of the magician and the intimate association of the bush soul of the Nagul with the human being are not termed lycanthropy. Now, the curse of lycanthropy was also considered by some scholars as being a divine punishment. If one believes that to be so. Werewolf literature shows many examples of God or saints allegedly cursing those who invoked their wrath with lycanthropy, such as the case of King Lycaon, who was turned into a wolf by Zeus as punishment for slaughtering one of his own sons and serving up the remains to the god as a dinner. Now those who were excommunicated by the Roman Catholic Church were also said to become werewolves. Now the power of transforming others into wild beasts was attributed not only to malignant sorcerers but to Christian saints as well. Not all angels, good and bad, have the power of transmutilating our bodies, and that was the dictum of Saint Thomas Aquinas. Saint Patrick, who was said to have transformed the Welsh king Berechicus into a wolf, not to less supposedly cursed an illustrious Irish family whose members were each doomed to be a wolf for 7 years. In other tales, the divine agency is even more direct. While in Russia, again, men supposedly became werewolves while incurring the wrath of the devil. A notable exception to this association of lycanthropy and the devil comes from a rare and lesser known account of an 80-year-old man named Theus. In 1692 in Jurgensburg, Livonia, Theus testified under oath that he and other werewolves were the hounds of God. He claimed that they were warriors who descended into hell to battle witches and demons. Now, their efforts ensured that the devil and his minions did not carry out the grain from the local failed crops down to hell. Now, Theus was ultimately sentenced to 10 lashes for idolatry and superstitious belief. Remedies. The various methods have existed for removing werewolf form. In antiquity, the ancient Greeks and Romans believed in the power of exhaustion and curing people of lycanthropy. Now, the victim would be subjected to long periods of physical activity in the hope of being purged of the malady. Now, this practice stemmed from the fact that many alleged werewolves would be left feeling weak and debilitated after committing depredations. In medieval Europe, various so when it comes to medieval Europe, traditionally, there are 3 methods. One can be to cure a victim of lycanthropy. Medicinally, you have wolfsbane. Surgically or by exorcism. Many of the curses advocated by medieval medical practitioners proved fatal to the patients. Now, wolfsbane is a spell or a potion that's used in Harry Potter. Now, one of the teachers in Harry Potter was a werewolf, and basically he would take the wolfsbane potion, and as long as he took that potion, he would be calm. He would be calm, and he would not attack anybody. Now, many of the curses advocated by medieval medical practitioners proved fatal to the patients. A Sicilian belief of Arabic origin holds out that a werewolf can be cured of its ailment by striking it on the forehead or scalp with a knife, basically. Another belief from the same culture involves the piercing of the werewolf's hands with nails. Sometimes less extreme methods were used, in the German lowland of Schleswig-Holstein, a werewolf could be cured if one were to simply address it 3 times by its Christian name. One Danish belief holds that merely scalding a werewolf will cure it. Not always the case either. A conversion to Christianity was a common method of removing lycanthropy in the medieval period, and devotion to Saint Hubert has been cited as both a cure for and protein from lycanthropes. Now, the connection to remnants. Now before the end of the 19th century, the Greeks believed that the corpse of werewolves, if not destroyed, would return to life in the form of werewolves or hyenas that prowled the battlefields, drinking the blood of dying soldiers in the same vein in some rural areas of Germany, Poland, and northern France. It's said, or once believed, that people who died in mortal sin came back to life as blood-drinking werewolves. Now, these undead werewolves would return to their human corpse from at daylight. They were dealt with by decapitation with a spade and exorcism by the parish priest. Now, the head would then be thrown into a stream where the weight of its sins were thought to weigh it down. Now, sometimes the same methods used to dispose of ordinary vampires would be used. The vampire was linked to the werewolf in East European countries, particularly in Bulgaria, Serbia, and Slovenia. Now, in Serbia, the werewolf and vampire are known collectively as Volkodlak. In Hungary and the Balkans. Now, with Hungarian folklore, the werewolves are said to live in the region of Transdanubia, and it was thought that the ability to change into a wolf was attained in infancy after suffering parental abuse by suffering parental abuse or by a curse. It is told that at the age of 7, the boy or the girl would leave home at night to go hunting, and they could change to a person or a wolf whenever they would want to. There's no who knows if that's true or not. But the curse can also be attained in adulthood if a person passes 3 times through an arch made of birch with the help of a wild rose spine. Now, the werewolves were known to exterminate all kind of farm animals, especially sheep. Remember, there was the boy who would always cry wolf whenever the wolf would come to attack the sheep, and then the people didn't believe him until it actually did happen. When the wolf attacked the sheep, when the wolf did show up to attack the sheep, nobody came because they didn't believe him when he kept crying it. Now, the transformation usually occurred during the winter solstice, Easter, and a full moon. Later in the 17th century and 18th century, the trials in Hungary were not only conducted against witches, but against werewolves too, and many records exist documenting connections between the two. Now vampires and werewolves are closely related in Hungarian folklore, both being feared in antiquity. Among the South Slavs and among the ethnic Kashubian people in present day Poland, there was a belief that if a child was born with hair, a birthmark, or a coal on their head, they were supposed to possess shape-shifting abilities. Though capable of turning into any animal they wished, it was commonly believed that such people preferred to turn into a werewolf. Now, Serbian Bukodlaks traditionally had the habit of congregating annually in the winter months when they would strip off their wolf skins and hang them from trees. They would then get a hold of another Bukodlak skin and burn it, releasing from its curse the Bukodlak from whom the skin came. Um, Now, according to Armenian lore, there are women who, in consequence of deadly sins, are condemned to spread 7 years, are condemned to spend 7 years in wolf form. Now, in a typical account, a condemned woman is visited by wolfskin toting spirit who orders her to wear the skin, and it causes her to acquire frightful cravings for human flesh soon after. Now, with her better nature overcome, the she-wolf devours each of her own children, then her relatives' children, in order of a relationship, and finally the children of strangers. Now she wanders only at night, with doors and locks springing open at her approach. When morning arrives, she reverts to human form and removes her wolfskin. The transformation is generally said to be involuntary, and thereafter there are alternate versions involving voluntary metamorphosis where the woman can transform at will. Um, Now, the Noskopis believe that the caribou afterlife is guarded by giant wolves that kill careless hunters venturing to. The Navajo people feared witches in wolves' clothing called macabre. Woodward thought that these beliefs were due to the Norse colonization of the Americas. When the European colonization of the Americas occurred, the pioneers brought their own werewolf folklore with them, and were later influenced by the lore of the neighboring colonies and those of the natives. Now, belief in the Loup Garou present in Canada, the upper and lower peninsulas of Michigan and upstate New York originates from French folklore influenced by Native American stories on the Wendigo. Um, in Mexico, there is a belief in a creature called the Nagol. In Haiti, there is a superstition that wolf spirits, known logically as Jirogue, meaning red eyes, can possess the bodies of unwitting persons and nightly transform them into cannibalistic creatures. Um, the Haitian Jirogues typically try to trick mothers into giving away their children voluntarily by waking them at night and asking their permission to take their child, to which the disoriented mother may either reply yes or no. The Haitian Jirogues differ from traditional European werewolves by the habit of actively trying to spread their lycanthrope condition to others, much like vampire history. Um, now, excuse me. Now, in modern history, it's long believed that werewolves can be killed by anything that's silver. Um, Now, most modern fiction describes werewolves as vulnerable to silver weapons and highly resistant to any other injuries. Um, the This creature appears in German folklore of the 19th century. The claim that the beast of Gavodian, an 18th century wolf or wolf-like creature, was shot by a silver bullet, and it appears to have been introduced by novelists retelling the story from 1935 onwards, but not in earlier versions. Um, Now, in English folklore prior to 1865, um, showed shapeshifters to be vulnerable to silver, till the publication shot a silver bun over their heads when they were instantly transformed into two ill-favored old ladies. 1640, the city of Greifswald, Germany, was infested by werewolves. A clever lad suggested that they gather all those silver buttons, goblets, belt buckles, and so forth, and melt them down into bullets for their muskets and pistols, and this time they slaughtered the creatures, and they rid Greifswald of the lycanthropes. Um, in the 1897 novel Dracula and the short story Dracula's Guest, which was written by Bram Stoker, drew on earlier mythologies of werewolves and several legendary demons, and was to voice the anxieties of an age and the fears of late Victorian patriarchy. Um, in Dracula's Guest, a band of military horsemen coming to the aid of the protagonist chase of Dracula, depicted as a great wolf, stating the only way to kill it is by a sacred bullet. Um, this is also mentioned in the main novel Dracula as well. Count Dracula stated in the novel that legends of werewolves originated from his Celesti racial bloodline, who himself is also depicted with the ability to shapeshift into a wolf at will during the night, but is unable to do so during the day except at noon. Um, the 1928 novel *The Wolf's Bride*, a tale from Estonia, written by the Finnish author Aneo Kallis, tells stories of the forester Predok's wife. Um, yeah, so in the 1928 novel *The Wolf's Bride*, a tale from Estonia, which was a book written by the Finnish author Aino Kallis, tells the story of the forester's Predok's wife Aelo, living in Hemia in the 17th century, who became a werewolf under the influence of a malevolent forest spirit known as Diabolus Silverum. Um, Now, the first feature film to feature an anthropomorphic werewolf, and an anthropomorphic werewolf, was the movie Werewolf of London in 1935. Um, the main werewolf of this film is a dapper London scientist who retains some of his style and most of his human features after he transforms. The werewolf was played by lead actor Henry Hole, who was unwilling to spend long hours being made up by makeup artist Jack Pierce. Universal Studios drew on a Balkan tale of a plant associated with lycanthropy, as there was no literary work to draw upon. Unlike the case of vampires, there was no reference to silver, nor other aspects of werewolf lore such as cannibalism. Um, A more tragic character is Lawrence Talbot, portrayed by Lon Chaney Jr. In 1941's The Wolfman. With Pierce's makeup more elaborate this time, the movie catapulted the werewolf into public consciousness. Sympathetic portrayals are few but notable, such as the comedic but tortured protagonist David Knowlton in An American Werewolf in London, and a less anguished and more confident and charismatic Jack Nicholson in the 1994 film Wolf. Over time, the depiction of werewolves has gone from fully malevolent to even heroic creatures, such as the movies Underworld and Twilight, as well as Bloodlad, Dance in the Vampire Bond, Rosario and Vampire, and various other forms like anime, manga, and comic books. Now, other werewolves were decidedly more willingly and malevolent, such as those in the novel The Howling and its subsequent sequels and film adaptations. The form a werewolf assumes was generally anthropomorphic in early films such as The Wolfman and Werewolf of London, but a larger and more powerful wolf in many other later films. Now, werewolves are often depicted as immune to damage caused by ordinary weapons, being vulnerable only to silver objects such as a silver tipped cane, bullet, or blade. This attribute was first adopted cinematically in The Wolfman, but this negative reaction to silver is sometimes so strong that the mere touch of the metal on a werewolf's skin will cause burns. Current day werewolf fiction almost exclusively involves lycanthropy being either a hereditary condition or transmitted like an infectious disease by the bite of another werewolf. Now, in some fiction, the power of the werewolf extends to human form, such as vulnerability to conventional injury due to their healing factor, superhuman speed and strength, and falling on their feet from high falls. aggressiveness and animalistic urges may be intensified and more difficult to control, such as hunger and sexual arousal. Usually, in these cases, the abilities are diminished in human form, and in other fiction, it can be cured by medicine men or antidotes. Now, along with the vulnerability to the silver bullet, the full moon being the cause of transformation only became part of the depiction of werewolves on a widespread basis in the 12th century. The first movie to feature the transformative effect of the full moon was Frankenstein Meets the Werewolf in 1943. Um, Now, werewolves are typically envisioned as working class monsters, often being low in socioeconomic status, although they can represent a variety of social classes, and at times they were seen as a way of representing aristocratic decadence during the 19th century horror literature. Um, Now, back in Nazi Germany, they used werewolf as a mythical creature's name, spelled in German. In 1942 to 1943 is the code name for one of Hitler's headquarters. In the war's final days, the Nazis' Operation Werewolf, being spelled being spelled WERWOLF, aimed at creating a commando force that would operate behind enemy lines as the Allies advanced through Germany itself. Two fictional depictions of Operation Werewolf, the U.S. television series True Blood, and the 2012 novel Wolf Hunter by J.L. Bennett, mixed the two meanings of werewolf by depicting the 1945 die-hard Nazi commandos as being actual werewolves. And that is pretty much the end of the werewolf story. Now, tell me what you're thinking of the werewolf is, if you have time to. Now, tell me if you what you think of the werewolf or vampire or anything like that. Next week we're going to do a video on the vampire, possibly. But to get a few stories out there that do not pertain to this. Somebody asked about my college courses. They're going great. I only had one class for the summer. Sorry, for the spring. My spring semester class is going to be over in a couple weeks, and then I have a 1 month break before I start my second class in the summer. As long as I maintain a C average, my job UPS will pay for the courses. And tomorrow I have an interview with the second job. Hopefully all goes well. I will also bring that up next week too if I get the job or not. The job is for a Brazilian steakhouse, which I've never had Brazilian food, so that'll be something to try out. Also, just to be forewarned, if anybody is a woman on my chat, if they have a crush on me, I'm sorry to break the heart, but I just started dating somebody, and that is also going well. But if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, Rusty the King, for more videos like this. I love my Greek mythology and any mythology stories. I'll keep doing as many as I can. Let me know what you're interested in on mythology, and I'll try to get to it as quickly as I can. Also, like I said, make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. And also leave a comment, let me know what you guys are thinking. And if you want to support my work even further, I do have a Patreon link under my About section of YouTube. And for just a little as a few bucks a video or a month, your donation can help go a long way. And thanks for listening.